Well, Jonathan, it's very good to have you at God Size Stories. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, tell us first, where are you located?
So I live in the Bahamas in Nassau and run an investment fund here.
Oh, I am so sorry for you, Jonathan. What a horrible life you must have.
I know it is a beautiful. It gets a little hot and humid in the summertime, but I do enjoy being here. And historically, there have been quite a few good investors here, like Sir John Templeton is one of my investing heroes. So it's part of the reason I moved here.
That's amazing. What an incredible life you've had. You just have done a little bit of everything and been everywhere in the world, it seems like. Uh,
Not quite, no. But yeah, I lived in Mexico for a few years and then moved to Spain when I was 7 when my parents moved. And then I went to college in the US and then lived in London for about 20 years before moving here.
That's it. Yeah, I saw that you actually went back to London to do your advanced studies there at Oxford.
Yes, yeah. So the Oxford's about 50-minute train ride north of London, but I'd go down to London very frequently. I enjoyed going to the museums and I love the city. And then decided to move there after doing my studies at Oxford.
That's incredible. Well, I am very excited about introducing you to my audience, but also talking about your brand new book. It's actually coming up now in February, so this is just in time for your launch of your book release date. Shooting Up: A Memory of Love, Loss, and Addiction. And before we start talking about this book, I need to say uh, you are an incredible writer. Your voice, your literary voice, is beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you.
you make people smile, cry, and everything in between in these pages. And
Thank you very much.
definitely a great addition to my library. So
Thank
uh,
you.
I want us to talk a little bit because it's a memoir, right? It's a love
Mhm.
story and a memoir and an encouragement as well, from a believer, who have you have witnessed firsthand what grace, love, and compassion looks like. So a little bit to my audience, you Jonathan grew up in Madrid during the heroin and AIDS epidemic in that city and in that country. And tell me, what are some of your earliest memories, and how did those experiences shape your faith?
Sure. So my parents were Christian missionaries, and they moved to Spain in 1983. And initially, they wanted to work with university students. So my father wanted to be a chaplain and start a church with students. But they settled in San Blas, which was a neighborhood that had one of the highest rates of drug use and juvenile crime in Europe at the time. And it was a relatively poor working class neighborhood. And they started helping addicts on the streets and helping families who had children who were drug addicts, taking them to drug rehab centers outside of Madrid. There were almost no centers in Madrid at the time. And it was really just trying to respond to a need that was there. And within a year or so, my parents realized that they needed to help the people there and change. They felt that God had called them to help the addicts, so they felt the calling had changed, and they decided to start a church there. And one addict came in off the street, Raul Gasto, and he then invited 8 of his friends to move into an apartment. There was Lindsay McKinsey, was an Australian missionary living there. So it really started from one addict bringing in his friends, and then the neighbors complained, rightly, that they didn't want to be living next to an apartment full of recovering heroin addicts, and so they went out and found a farm, and then they invited more of their friends in. So there were about 30 addicts living in the farm. So it just started growing and growing over time. And 40 years later, my father is still running the drug rehab center. But I was fortunate enough as a child to have a firsthand view and a front row seat to all that was happening. And the book is really this essentially a love story to friends, the early addicts in the program and family. My family that was started the drug rehab center, and I feel I was very fortunate to watch my parents and look at what they were doing, which is essentially a Christian love and empathy in action.
It's incredible. Now, do your parents, are they still in Spain running the
Uh,
center?
so my mother passed away a few years ago, but my father is 79. He'll be 80 in August, and he's still running the drug rehab center, obviously with quite a lot of help of the addicts who came through the program and stayed, and now help run the program with him. But I think he wants to work helping other people until the day he dies.
That's incredible. What a story. Well, first of all, I'm sorry for the loss of your mom. I can only imagine what a vacuum she left in that, in your dad's life, in your life, and of course, even for this ministry, right? So what a legacy as well, right? That she left and that your dad is leaving behind. That's a beautiful story. And I know that your parents, they modeled for you very early in life what Christian love and compassion looks like in a very different environment, right? So how did that change for you as a young boy, your understanding of God's grace?
Well, I think that for many people, their faith or indeed belief is tied to hearing sermons or reading books. I think for seeing what my parents did, my brothers and I saw that you have to put it into action. And so, I think Christian love and faith without action isn't worth very much. And certainly the only way to really show that you have it is to go out and to care for the hurting and the suffering and the needy. And if you look at the example, that Jesus had in the Gospels, it was going to see the people that society did not want to see. So the lepers and the outcasts and the prostitutes. And my parents certainly did that, in the 80s. And even today, people don't really like addicts very much. But back then, they almost all shared needles and became HIV positive. And much of the early generation of the addicts died of AIDS. And they were the lepers in the 1980s and early 90s that people didn't want to touch or be around. And much of our childhood and high school years was going to the hospital to visit people who were suffering from AIDS and dying. And that really was watching my parents be with the modern day lepers in the way that Jesus did.
Uh, And as a kid, I can only imagine the impact in your life, right? Of course, at 7 years old, you said that you moved there when you were seven. Uh, in a way, at 7 years old, like you really don't know better, right? Like that's
Yeah,
all you know, right? So you're
exactly.
thrust into this environment, and you don't have anybody probably to compare, hardly, uh, rather than people who are right in that environment with you. So let me ask you, how was it? Like, how was your understanding to be among older heroin addicts? And like, were you afraid of? Tell me.
Yeah, so I mean, there were a couple addicts who, I was afraid of. One in particular, and he comes out in the book a bit. And he was actually a very lovely person, and it turns out that his father had used to abuse him, and so I think quite often people who have faced abuse themselves end up hurting and abusing others. And but he was just a lovely person, Manolo Majara, and as you pointed out, when you're very young and small, you don't know that there is any different. I didn't know how odd my childhood was really until I went off to college and started, meeting and talking to other people whose lives were totally different from mine. And
Mm.
it's only with the passing of time that I've realized just how odd and strange my childhood was, and obviously that's partly why I wrote the memoir, that it is a unique and interesting story. But the story itself is universal in the sense that we all have friends and family that we love. We all love and eventually suffer loss. Losing loved ones. Some people I think are more fortunate in some ways that they have less loss in their lives. Others have a lot more loss in their lives. But we had loss in the family, but also loss in the our dear friends. And Raul was the first addict in the program. He died of AIDS in 1995, and he was an older brother to us. Um, and so that certainly I had shattering tragedies in my life, but I write in the epilogue that I feel I was very fortunate in many ways because I was always surrounded by family and community that loved me, and I was surrounded by love. I think true misfortune and trauma are for people who suffer and are not surrounded by love.
You just shared something that I think that I know that I have faced that with my children. They lost an uncle who was a beloved uncle at a tragic accident. They were only 6 and 10. They were very young. So, and I'm sure that my audience has somebody out there who has a child in their lives who may have lost someone or is going through that right now. So tell me, how did that impact you as a kid, losing someone, people that you loved so dearly? And as an adult today, how did your parents, how they helped you through it? How can you maybe coach someone who's going through that with a younger kid in their lives?
Certainly. The beginning of the book, starts out with a great deal of fun and innocence, and it's a strange environment, and then grief enters, and through the story, and one of the things that helped my family certainly was to know that you're not alone. That you're not the only person who's suffered this. That others who have suffered this as well. That in Spanish, they say, "Te acompaño en tu dolor." I accompany you in your pain and your feeling. And I think that that's one of the key things, is to know that you are not alone. And my mother used to correspond with a group of women in the U.S. It was a group called Compassionate Friends. And certainly grief is very solitary and it's very painful, and no one can really lift the burden from you. But at least being with others is helpful. And I think that books certainly are very helpful. And my parents used to read A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis to us at the dinner table. Um, I hope my book might be of help to people who are also suffering. And in the beautiful movie Shadowlands about C.S. Lewis, a student and then C.S. Lewis himself says we read to know that we're not alone. And I think that that is, one of the most important things.
Well, you describe shooting up as a love letter, right? Can you just expand on that for us?
Certainly. So I think that some books, memoirs, tend to focus very much on the writer's pain, and certainly there is quite a lot of that. And it's like a cathartic experience. They almost write it as a form of therapy. In other cases, sometimes it's a rejection of their family. And so the book is meant to create their own identity. I really wrote the book because I wanted to honor the memory, and the identity, the beautiful character of my friends and my family. And I, it, you know, it's a very honest portrayal. So my parents in the book, the main characters, they're complex people. They have flaws. They're not perfect, and that really comes out. And my father jokingly said that I was too hard on him, but he loves the book and thinks that I told the story as it was. And I think that the best thing that you can do as a writer is to present people in all their complexity. I'm not a perfect person, and I hope if someone ever wrote about me, that my flaws would come out. But it's a love letter, meaning that like you come to appreciate actually the profound humanity of the characters. And some people have told me when they've gotten to the end of the book that they feel like they know many of the main characters in the book. And I think as a writer, like that's all I could really ask for, is for these to be people that they've never met, to be real on the page, and to have that love for them.
Mm. You remind me of when I wrote my first book, that where I shared a lot of my stories, of childhood, and of course, you you have to share some of the things that happened to you that some people caused, and it's not an easy thing to do, right? Like whenever you are kind of exposing some of the weaknesses or the hardships that you've gone through caused by sometimes your parents even,
Yeah.
and that is not an easy thing to do. So I commend you because I know how hard it is, because my book, my parents, I'm from Brazil originally, so my book was published in Brazil, to into 2024, and my dad was reading, and he's like, "Whoa, I didn't know that what that thing that I said, you know, had impacted you so much," and it's very true. So
Yeah, and I think that readers ultimately have, to use a crude term, but like a bullshit detector. They sense whether it's true or not. And I think that if you're not honest with the reader, you're in a way breaking their trust. Like they're buying a book on the expectation that it's real. And if it's not real, they know that, and then they'll lose interest, and the story doesn't matter. But I think if it is real and it comes from a place of honesty and love, I think then the story is all that much better.
absolutely. And there's another point too, as believers, we are telling stories. And of course, like my parents are believers and yours too. We're telling a story not just for fun. We're trying to point people to Christ and even the brokenness of even the best of believers, right? The people who are very faithful believers, we're broken. We're all broken. And so,
Well, and what's interesting is I actually, believe it or not, did not write the book to point anyone in any direction. What I really wanted to do was to tell a universal story of love and loss.
mhm.
And I wanted to just be as honest as possible. And so there is a lot of the Christian message in the book because my parents were telling a Christian message, but all the first addicts were telling a Christian message. And the strange thing is, many friends who are not Christians at all, writers, literary friends, have come away like with a deep and profound appreciation for Christianity, partly because it's not meant to preach. And one of the things that I don't like in general about Christian books is that the object of it is to teach or to preach, and so often the human element gets lost in there, which is that the world is complicated and messy, and heroes suffer, and things don't always turn out very well. But that's the world that we live in, and you still have to find the ability to find grace and love within that.
Yes, very, very true. And I love that point because it's true. If you don't, if you just write it very much to the Christian audience and very biblical and everything, then you do not invite the broader audience sometimes, right? To actually listen to your stories. So, well, we'll and you're talking about this right now because we live in an age of like noise and distraction and different opinions. So with your experience, right, your life experience, especially in those reflecting back on those early years, what have you learned about like listening to God, to yourself, and to others?
People often ask like what lesson or what things I would want the reader to come away with. I think the main thing I just would want readers to come away from the book with is more love and empathy for others. And the example that my parents had, or gave, I think they tried to live out the Sermon on the Mount to show more love to others. And I think that when you are exposed to death and surrounded by it, you become more aware of the preciousness of life and the preciousness of family and friends. And I hope that's a lesson the readers can take away from it, and one certainly that I, as a writer, tried to take away from it.
No, very, very good. Now, Jonathan, you started your life, of course, as a missionary kid, but then you went into the finance world. You spent most of your career really in finance. You've written several books, of course. But let me ask you this: in your world, in your career, how have those early lessons that you share in this book, how the lessons about humility, compassion, and love, how have they shaped your understanding of success in your career? You have a very successful career.
Oh, well, thank you. I think that if you want to be a jerk or a hypocrite, you can do that in any profession. You can do that within the Christian church too.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are many pastors and leaders like that. And I think in the world of investing, I know some, I won't mention any names, but I know some fund managers that are pretty egotistical. But I also know some extraordinary people and profoundly humble. One of my mentors, is extraordinarily successful, and there's no photographs of him on the internet. He just runs his
Mm.
fund very well and did a great job, and donates quite a lot to charity. And so I think you really lead the life that you want. and if you have certain values, that's the kind of life that you're going to live. And if you don't have those values, or you have the wrong set of values, you can certainly live a pretty miserable and lonely life too. So I think that, obviously the financial industry is one where there's a lot of money involved. But the fundamental human choices that one makes are really ones that you have to decide for yourself, sort of, what kind of life you want to lead. And I hope that as the fund that I run does well, that I can use money to donate to charitable activities, not least to my parents' drug rehab center. And that's the way I think of the world.
Mm. And you bring a very important point, because people think, to be in ministry, you have to be in ministry, like that your title has to be missionary or pastor or Christian speaker or what have you. But you invite people to actually look at any kind of profession inside the box, within those lenses of, like, you are called to bring glory to God and others to Christ. And I see that
Well,
in your career, you have really shaped that kind of mindset.
Well, when I look at my parents, spent decades as missionaries helping others. While the drug rehab center itself ran businesses which provided for a free rehabilitation for the addicts, there are many, many different points in time in which, wealthy people, Christians and churches donated money, kept my parents on the mission field as missionaries, donated money to help the drug rehab center at key points in time. And so I think without people, having gone out and run businesses and made money, there wouldn't be any money for charitable activity. And so, people often asked whether my father would want me and my brothers to, follow in his footsteps. And my father actually encouraged us not to, and to go out and try to be successful and help others. And so I completely agree with you that there isn't only one way to, be of use to others.
Yeah, I often say that those people, those about 500 people that walked with Jesus after the resurrection, and before he ascended and gave the Great Commission, right? They were not all Peters and right, and Jameses. So they were like all kinds. They had all kinds of trades, and they were called to do the Great Commission wherever they went. So you are right now in finance and in your own way supporting the Great Commission with your job, and now with this incredible book. Well, Jonathan, tell me, as you wrote this book, I know that you had a very strong intent in your heart, a message that you wanted to pass on to whoever read. What is the main message that you want to relate?
So I was actually thinking about this as I was editing the book, and the story. I hope and think it's beautiful, and people have told me that. But my literary agent and editor were like, well, can you provide some final thoughts in the epilogue? And so I expanded it a little bit, and I was really just thinking, like, what were things that my mother used to tell me? And I remember, one of the things she said was not to harden your heart, but the other was the answer to suffering, I think, is always more love. And I think that that's the message that I would want to leave the readers with, which is, the problems that we face, whether it's in friendships or family and even society at large. I think the answer is always more love.
That's beautiful. Well, Jonathan, what a pleasure to talk to you. And listen, if you're listening to this or watching, remember to go to my show notes. As usual, my guests usually do. He is giving away a copy of his memoir to someone in my audience. It could be the person who wins it. So just go in there, fill out the form for a chance to win. And in those show notes, you're going to have all that you need to connect with Jonathan and to purchase this beautiful book. Jonathan, thank you so much for this time, and God bless you. And may you continue to make a huge impact for the kingdom of God.
Well, thank you so much, Patricia. It's a pleasure being on your show.
Thank you so much.